We often think of medieval life as dirty, brutal, and primitive, but what if the people of that time actually knew survival tricks that could still save lives today? Without electricity, modern tools, or internet, they built systems that kept them fed, warm, and alive in the harshest conditions imaginable. In this video, you'll discover 7 genius survival methods used by medieval people, many of which still work today, and at the end, a surprising truth. They may have been more prepared for collapse than we are now. 1. Fire from steel and stone. In a world without matches, lighters, or gas stoves, fire wasn't a convenience, it was survival. And medieval people mastered a method that still works today: flint and steel fire starting. This method relied on 2 simple elements: a shard of flint stone and a piece of carbon steel. When struck together at the right angle, they produced a shower of tiny sparks, barely visible, but hot enough to ignite the right tinder. That tinder was key. Peasants used char cloth, a piece of fabric pre-burned in low oxygen conditions, or dried fungi like amadou from horsehoof mushrooms. Even bark fibers, moss, or tow, a byproduct of flax processing, could catch a spark if dry enough. The skill was knowing not just how to spark, but what to spark into. Once lit, the ember was gently transferred into a bundle of dry material, grass, straw, linen, scraps, and blown to life. It took patience, practice, and good lungs. But once you had flame, you had power. This wasn't just about cooking. Fire meant warmth in freezing homes, smoke to preserve meat, steam to clean wounds, and light to work or pray after sunset. In many villages, the ability to start and maintain a fire was a respected role. Some households even carried glowing coals in ceramic containers from house to house when someone needed help rekindling their hearth. Fires also connected people. Community cookfires, seasonal bonfires, and shared ovens were spaces of social exchange and cooperation. The flame wasn't just physical, it was symbolic of life, comfort, and continuity. And the best part, this method still works today. Flint and steel kits are used by bushcrafters and survivalists across the world precisely because they don't rely on fuel or flame, just physics, pressure, and skill. Unlike matches or lighters which run out, flint and steel can last for years, and in a survival situation, this ancient trick can be the difference between a cold night and a livable one. What makes it genius isn't that it worked back then. It's that it still does, with nothing more than stone, steel, and human will. 2. Earth ovens and clay cooking. Today, cooking means turning a knob or pressing a button, but for medieval villagers, especially in rural or nomadic areas, cooking meant creating the conditions for heat, insulation, and time. One of their most clever techniques still used in bushcraft and survival circles today is the earth oven. An earth oven is exactly what it sounds like, a hole in the ground that becomes a fully functional oven. The process began by digging a pit, lining it with stones, and building a fire inside. After several hours, the stones became intensely hot, hot enough to slow cook meat, roots, grains, or bread like flatbreads. Once the fire burned down to coals, the food was wrapped in layers of leaves, bark, or cloth, sometimes even clay, to protect it and trap moisture. Then it was placed into the pit, covered with earth, and left to cook for hours, sometimes overnight. This technique had multiple advantages. It required no metal tools, preserved fuel by trapping heat, and cooked food evenly and slowly, making tough meats tender and hard grains digestible. It was also safer. In times of conflict or secrecy, a buried fire gave off far less visible smoke and light. But earth ovens weren't just survival tools, they were part of the communal rhythm. In many villages, shared pits were used during feasts or large work gatherings, allowing people to prepare food for many using minimal fuel. These underground ovens became gathering points where meals weren't just cooked, but stories were told, plans made, and alliances strengthened. The related technique of clay wrapping, coating meat or fish in clay and placing it directly into coals, offered similar benefits. As the clay hardened, it sealed the juices in. When cracked open, the hardened shell peeled away the skin and scales, leaving behind tender, flavorful food with no modern tools required. Both methods reflect a larger truth. Medieval people understood how to use what was around them. Dirt, stones, leaves, and fire weren't obstacles, They were resources. And this kind of knowledge doesn't expire. Today, earth ovens are still used by survivalist homesteaders and indigenous communities around the world. No power required, just patience, preparation, and primal understanding. It's a reminder that you don't need stainless steel or electricity to make a good meal. Sometimes you just need a shovel and some fire. Natural refrigeration. Before fridges and freezers, keeping food from spoiling was one of the biggest survival challenges. But medieval people had clever, low-tech methods to extend shelf life using nothing but nature. Techniques that are still useful in off-grid living and emergencies today. The first method was simple: underground storage. Food, especially root vegetables, dairy, and meat, was kept in root cellars or dugout pits lined with straw, leaves, or clay. Below the surface, the temperature remained cool and consistent, even during hot summers. Humidity was controlled with ventilation shafts or gravel layers, reducing mold and bacteria growth. Many medieval homes had cellars dug beneath their floors, accessible by trapdoors. These spaces didn't just store food, they stored time. A cabbage that would wilt in a day above ground could last a month in the cool, dark stillness of the earth. For villages without permanent cellars, people used stone or clay jars buried up to the neck, often shaded by trees or walls. Butter was kept wrapped in soaked cloth, eggs were submerged in lime water, and milk could be cooled in buckets lowered into wells or streams. The medieval version of a walk-in fridge. Even running water played a key role. Streams and rivers were used to keep wine, ale, and dairy chilled. Stone boxes or woven baskets were submerged in flowing water where the constant movement prevented bacterial growth. Preservation wasn't only about cold, it was also about airflow. Grains, herbs, and nuts were hung in dry, elevated spaces, often near chimneys or rafters. The warm, dry air cured them naturally, preventing moisture buildup and insect infestation. This method worked for months, sometimes years, with nothing more than a rope and some patience. What made these tricks so effective was not technology, but a deep understanding of nature's patterns. Medieval people observed temperature, wind, humidity, and light, not as data, but as instinct. They knew when to open the cellar, when to bury, when to wrap, and when to dry. In a modern blackout or off-grid lifestyle, these same principles still apply. Food doesn't need electricity. It needs the right environment. And that's something our ancestors mastered with dirt, water, and intuition. In a world increasingly reliant on artificial cooling, medieval, natural refrigeration reminds us sometimes survival is just a few degrees underground. Water, filtering with sand and cloth. Access to clean water wasn't guaranteed in the Middle Ages, far from it. Streams carried animal waste, wells could be contaminated, and stagnant ponds were breeding grounds for disease, yet somehow people managed to survive for centuries. One of their greatest survival tools? Simple, low-tech water filtration. The concept was basic but brilliant. Remove the visible impurities first, then reduce odor and sediment with a natural filtration process. One common method involved pouring water through layers of cloth, usually tightly woven linen. This removed larger debris like insects, algae, and dirt. But that was just the start. For deeper filtering, medieval communities used sand and charcoal layers, often inside a ceramic vessel or a carved-out wooden trough. Water would be poured at the top and would slowly trickle through gravel, coarse sand, fine sand, and finally charcoal made from burned wood. Each layer had a function. Gravel caught stones and plant matter. Sand filtered sediment. Charcoal absorbed odors, toxins, and microorganisms. The resulting water wasn't sterile by modern standards, but it was far safer than drinking directly from a river. And this system didn't require metal, pressure, or fuel, only patience and gravity. In wealthier homes or monasteries, stone basins were used to construct more permanent filtering systems where water flowed through channels carved into the rock. Rainwater collection was also key. Rooftops were angled to fill barrels or cisterns, sometimes lined with clay or pitch to keep them clean. Even the use of herbs and ashes played a role in water treatment. Certain plants like yarrow or thyme were steeped in water to reduce bacterial load, while wood ash, alkaline, could help reduce acidity or remove certain impurities. In survival terms, the brilliance here lies in the accessibility. None of this required advanced tools, just cloth, sand, wood, and time. Even today, similar sand filters are used in developing regions or disaster zones, endorsed by humanitarian organizations for their effectiveness. It's easy to take running water for granted until it's gone, and when it is, this ancient knowledge may be the difference between dehydration and safety. The next time you see a muddy stream, remember, medieval survival wasn't magic, it was method. 5. Using fat as light and heat. Before kerosene, candles, or electricity, firelight had to be made from scratch, and medieval people found a way to do it using something readily available: animal fat. In fact, tallow, rendered fat, was one of the most versatile survival tools of the era, used for both illumination and warmth. The process was straightforward. After slaughtering animals, usually pig, sheep, or cattle, nothing went to waste. The fat was collected, slowly heated, and strained to remove impurities. The result was a thick, creamy substance called tallow, which could be poured into molds, stored in jars, or shaped by hand. For lighting, tallow was used to make candles and rushlights. A wick, often made from dried rushes, twisted linen, or even bits of bark, was dipped or embedded in the fat. The flame didn't burn as clean as beeswax, and it certainly didn't smell pleasant, but it burned long enough to read, work, or move through the dark, and more importantly, it could be made in almost any home with no need for trade or coin. In survival situations, tallow had another benefit: it could be eaten. Though unpleasant, a small amount of rendered fat provided calories and energy. This made tallow a kind of emergency ration during long winters, sieges, or travel. Fat was also used to fuel small heat lamps, clay or metal containers with a wick dipped in grease. These devices warmed small spaces or cooked simple meals. Combined with a reflective surface like polished metal or a white wall, they could brighten a surprisingly large area. But the genius of tallow didn't stop there. It was also used to waterproof boots and cloth, lubricate tools, soothe cracked skin, and preserve leather. One resource, dozens of uses. In modern prepping and off-grid communities, tallow is still respected as a long-landing, multi-use item. It stores well, ignites easily, and provides a critical combination of light, heat, and fuel when other sources run out. Medieval peasants weren't just making do, they were innovating. They turned slaughter waste into survival fuel. And that kind of resourcefulness, it's as relevant now as it was 700 years ago. Signal fires and smoke codes. Long before radios, phones, or walkie-talkies, medieval people had to rely on line of sight and flame to send messages across great distances. And in times of war, invasion, or emergency, they used a system as old as fire itself: signal fires. The concept was simple, but the execution required precision, coordination, and timing. At key vantage points, hilltops, towers, or forest clearings, fires were pre-built and kept ready to ignite. When danger was spotted, like an enemy army approaching, the first fire was lit. That flame, visible for miles, would be seen by the next outpost, which would then light their own fire, and so on. Within hours, entire regions could be alerted to threats. Castles could prepare defenses, villagers could evacuate, and militias could mobilize. All without a single spoken word. But these weren't just random flames. Over time, systems evolved. The number of fires, the pattern of smoke, or the timing between them could signal specific threats. One fire might mean approaching danger. Two in quick succession might mean armed force. A delay could imply direction or distance. This practice was so effective that it remained in use for centuries, even appearing in military campaigns as late as the 18th and 19th centuries. And it's not just European. Indigenous peoples across the world, from Africa to Asia to the Americas, developed similar methods with coded smoke signals, making it a truly global survival tactic. But the technique wasn't just military. In isolated communities, smoke was used to signal for help, mark territory boundaries, or call seasonal gatherings. The key was visibility, timing, and interpretation. In survival terms today, this ancient trick is still incredibly relevant. Signal fires can be used in wilderness rescue, off-grid communities, or in grid-down scenarios. A well-built fire that produces black or white smoke can be seen by aircraft hikers or neighboring settlements. and can save lives when communication fails. All it takes is a clear space, dry fuel, and something to burn green for thick smoke. And knowledge, of course. Knowledge medieval people mastered without ever picking up a phone. When you can't call for help, light can speak for you. And in the Middle Ages, they knew exactly what it was saying. 7. Herbal first aid. In the absence of hospitals, doctors, or pharmaceuticals, medieval people turned to what they had always relied on: plants. The medieval first aid kit wasn't made of plastic or metal. It was a garden, sometimes cultivated, often wild, and its ingredients were passed down not by prescription, but by memory and tradition. Wounds, infections, fevers, pain, all treated with herbs that many modern people walk past without noticing. One of the most common was yarrow. Applied directly to wounds, its leaves helped stop bleeding and reduce inflammation. In a time when even small cuts could turn fatal, this plant was often carried in foraging pouches or tied into belts. For infections and illness, garlic was the medieval go-to. Crushed into a paste or steeped in wine, it acted as a powerful antimicrobial and immune booster. Thyme and sage, too, were used in tinctures and teas to treat respiratory problems and sore throats, especially useful during long winters in smoky homes. Burns and skin irritations, comfrey was the answer. Known as bone kit, its roots were mashed into poultices to reduce swelling and promote healing. Plantain, a common weed, not the banana, was another favorite. Its leaves drew out poison from insect stings, blisters, and even snake bites. But perhaps the most widely used plant was nettle. Beyond its nutritional value, nettle tea was considered cleansing, reducing joint pain, clearing skin, and treating anemia. It was survival in leaf form, food, medicine, and tonic in one. What made these remedies genius wasn't just the plants. It was the system of knowledge. Medieval people tracked the moon, the seasons, the soil. They knew when to harvest, how to dry, and which parts to use: leaves, stems, roots, flowers. Some techniques even included incantations or religious rituals, blending healing with faith. And while modern medicine has replaced much of this with lab-made compounds, many modern drugs still derive from these very plants. Aspirin, originally from willow bark; morphine, from poppies; penicillin, discovered by accident, but medieval herbalists had already used moldy bread poultices to treat wounds. In survival situations, the logic still holds. No pharmacy? Know your plants. A few leaves and the right knowledge could mean the difference between healing and infection. Medieval medicine wasn't superstition. It was observation, trial, and centuries of lived experience. And today, when systems fail, those same leaves might save you, too. The truth about medieval survival. We often look at the Middle Ages with a sense of superiority. No technology, no electricity, no modern medicine. But after these 7 survival tricks, maybe it's time to ask, who's really more prepared to survive without the system? Medieval people didn't rely on supply chains, smart devices, or digital weather forecasts. They read the wind. They knew the soil. They understood the language of fire, water, plants, and stone. Every day was a test of resourcefulness, and every household was its own survival unit. They didn't have to go back to the land. They never left it. Today, we pride ourselves on innovation, but we've outsourced almost everything that keeps us alive: food, heat, water, medicine, communication. If the lights go out for a week, most people wouldn't know where to begin. That's what makes these medieval techniques so powerful. They weren't optional. They were life, and many of them still work, unchanged, for those who choose to learn. So maybe it's not about romanticizing the past. It's about respecting the knowledge it carried. Knowledge that kept families warm, fed, healed, and connected, without a single wire or screen. And the question now isn't whether these tricks are still relevant. The real question is, if you had to, could you survive like they did?